Okay, so this was a really special episode for me. Jeffrey Boadi is someone who I've admired for a long time on social media. He effortlessly creates wonderful content which is designed to empower people to eat more plant-based foods. But it was only when I met Jeffrey for the first time recently and started to learn a little bit more about his life that I truly start to understand what this guy was all about. Today, Jeffrey opens up about the challenges he's been through over the last year. I praise him for his vulnerability and for sharing things with us. And I genuinely think how he describes how he's moved forward with his life will be incredibly moving, but also empowering for so many. Today, we talk about Jeffrey's mindset and the steps he's taken to help him grow in the last year. We talk about his journey originally into plant-based nutrition. We also talk about the role of eating more plants for our mental health. And we also discuss plenty of practical tips to help us improve our diets. Thanks again, Jeffrey, for opening up, and I hope you do enjoy the episode. Jeff, welcome to my humble abode. Nice to see you again, mate.
Yes, mate. Good to catch up and let's get into it.
Not gonna lie, I've been pretty excited, to be fair. It's one of those, I think we met, it was a couple of months ago now, but since then, I remember coming home saying to Bex, I was like, oh, me and Jeffrey, we're going to be mates.
Yeah.
Like, we really got on. I felt like there was a bit of a connection. So it's nice to actually get down and maybe to speak about something that you're quite passionate about.
Yeah, definitely.
You come across as a pretty cool, calm, collected guy. Has that always been Jeffrey Boadi?
I think so. I think I've always been quite level-headed. I've never sort of allowed too many things to kind of sway me, one way or the other. And I'm sure we'll speak about certain things that I've gone through and certain books that I've read in the past, like, for example, The Power of Now, just helped me kind of maintain a level of focus, being present. So I don't let too many things ruffle my feathers, and that's always kind of been me. Yeah, nice.
And you can definitely tell.
Yeah.
When did your passion for plant-based or just nutrition in general start?
I'd say 2017. So I watched a documentary called What the Health. I'm sure you might have heard of it.
Yeah, I've seen it.
I remember my sister kind of coming home at the time and saying to me, oh, you need to watch this documentary that's, all about diet and disease. You'd be really interested in it. And I'd always do caveat this by saying that documentaries are typically quite biased. So they can, maybe throw out some, nonsense claims. I think there was a claim in the documentary that said like eating one egg a day is the same as smoking 5 cigarettes, which is just ridiculous. But it did give me enough information in there and enough of a jolt for me to be like, wow, I'm going to change my entire diet and lifestyle overnight. And whereas before I was very much meat heavy, your typical gym diet, sweet potato, lean meats, fish, multiple eggs in the morning, I just completely transitioned to a plant-based diet overnight.
Wow.
So I felt very compelled to just change. And then it was just going through that process, and it wasn't just about going plant-based. I wanted to still do it for like performance and training and health and longevity. And there was that process of kind of just learning about everything, learning about key nutrients, learning about, how to optimize it for performance and recovery and lean muscle growth and things like that. And that kind of led me down the rabbit hole of really just kind of wanting to get a kind of wide range of that kind of nutrition knowledge. And I guess kind of where I find myself today.
So what was it for you? What was that trigger in the documentary, or then what rabbit hole did that lead you down that sort of made you make that change?
I think it was mainly a case of, I felt like, wow, I've now actually got some information to make my own dietary choices. And I could have, because I think a lot of the choices that I've made, and like many people in society, they're based on culture, tradition, what society deems as normal. So I got all this information. I was like, right, I can actually make a choice now. And I could have reduced my meat consumption and probably would have still been pretty healthy, but I just felt really compelled to just be like, just cut it all out. And, if my health had tanked, it might have been a different story. I might have gone back to how I was eating before, but my health just got better. My sleep got better. My recovery got better. Clarity of thought, more energy, feeling lighter. And this was within like 2 or 3 weeks. So I just started to feel incredible straight away, right off the bat. But obviously I wanted to maintain that over the long term. A lot of people, tend to do feel some benefits going plant-based, but maybe start to tail off after a number of years if they're not doing it right or not focusing on the key nutrients. But for me, I wanted to just remain dialed in all the time. And that's kind of how I just became a bit of a nerd for nutrition. So yeah, I think it was that kind of trigger of being like, wow, I've now got information to make my own choices and not have my choices dictated by society, tradition, etc.
For me, on my personal note, I probably a similar amount of time ago to you, I did watch a similar documentary. I think it may have been What the Health.
Yeah.
And it certainly was the first time I sort of snapped out of an unconscious program that I had sort of been on of what my diet was and who I was as an eater, and that was the first time I ever really thought about it. I think where we differ and where I'm a little bit jealous, I think, is perhaps I didn't then take on as much commitment to go into learning more about how to really develop that plant-based diet. Because if I was truly honest, I would love to be more plant-based. I do my best through the week. I've definitely got Bex to eat more plant-based foods, and we do make a good go at it. But we're definitely not perfect. And I guess it's a bit of a journey. And I think that's where I would like to sort of learn from people like you. And I think that's why I probably came across your social media pages, and that's where I sort of first saw your name, and where I find that's so useful. And I think we have loads of resources now. We are actually, everything's at tips of our fingers, isn't it? So the documentaries is a fascinating one. Do you think everyone should watch a documentary like that? Should that be like something we teach people at schools? Should we be showing people a spectrum of these documentaries?
You know what? I'm not entirely sure if I think people should all watch documentaries, because I think one thing that I think for me was so important was that this was the starting point for me. And I was now going to go down the rabbit hole of, doing nutritional research, reading scientific papers, reading books, looking at listening to podcasts, watching videos. So for me, it was like, that was that initial starting point to then go really deep in the rabbit hole and make sure, right, if I'm going to do this, it needs to be absolutely.
It was that spark, right?
Exactly. Whereas I think some people might watch it and maybe don't have much nutritional information or a desire to gain any kind of nutritional information and think, I'm going to go vegan. But then they don't realize about the key nutrients that you need to look out for, such as the B12, omega-3, DHA and EPA. If you're not eating fish, vitamin D supplement potentially, and then other nutrients that you need to just be mindful of, like iron, and making sure that you combine it with vitamin C to help with absorption, calcium, iodine, these types of things. It does take I always say it does take almost like a baseline level of nutritional information and nutritional knowledge to really do it and do it well and begin to thrive. And I'm not sure if everyone has that or everyone has that desire. I think, they are interesting documentaries. As I said, they can be somewhat biased. But I think one thing that I do think that, in schools, people should just be taught about nutrition on a wider scale. And then that will allow people to make better choices later in life. Because, when we're in school, and I'm sure if you remember being back in school, I don't remember any kind of education or knowledge on nutrition. And then people get into, adults 20, 30, still eating processed foods, still eating, a lot of these foods that we know are linked to chronic disease, and they can't really snap out of these habits because they don't really know where to start. So I think a level of nutritional information in schools and at a young age I think that is something that should definitely be done. Perhaps these documentaries, maybe people can watch them if they want to. But yeah, I think that's getting that base level of information over to people from a young age, I think is the key.
I think that's a great answer. The documentaries are inflammatory, I think.
Yeah, of course.
They're there to spark a reaction. And that's why they have so many, counter documentaries or these sort of counter arguments.
Videos,
But they do a job, and they get you thinking, and they make you start on a journey towards more knowledge. Because any diet, using that in inverted commas, that word, because it's a bit of a sort of veiled word, it's a bit funny, but any amount of food that we eat, any variety of food we eat can be dangerous without the right knowledge, so a plant-based diet can be incredibly beneficial, but you can also find yourself with, severe diseases by becoming vitamin B12 deficient.
Exactly.
Can you touch on why vitamin B12 is really important for anyone going vegetarian, plant-based?
So it's a nutrient that is very heavily involved in red blood cell formation, nerve function. And if you become deficient in it, and humans' B12 stores can typically be held for quite some time. I believe it's like 5 or so years or something like that. But if you become deficient in that, you can experience severe fatigue, neuropathy. So this is not something that you want to go down. So it's non-negotiable really that you need to just pop a supplement, whether that's 250 micrograms per day, or I think it's 2,500 across the week, once a week. But again, B12 is very, very easily accessible. There's multiple forms. You've got cyanocobalamin, methylcobalamin. So it's very widely available, and it's something that you just need to do as a vegan.
And there is an argument that vitamin B12, that we shouldn't be plant-based as humans because you can't get it from a plant-based diet. And I've seen a little bit about this, and I just wondered what your thoughts were, and I can sort of try and explain why people say that, and then what's the flip side argument to that?
Well, I think there's the kind of natural is best, which I think is a little bit of a fallacy, because for me, I think it's more about what are the health outcomes. You can still adopt a plant-based diet and still reap, huge benefits in terms of your fiber, gut bacteria, gut microbiome modulation, healthy plant proteins, lower rates of saturated fat. and you can just pop a supplement. And it's funny because the supplement industry wasn't created for vegans. Like plenty of people who are omnivores are maybe going to be deficient in nutrients such as magnesium and folate, which are abundant in plant-based foods, in dark leafy greens, black beans, other legumes, etc., etc. So as I said, I think the kind of natural is best is a bit of a fallacy, because we live in 2022 where we wear shoes everywhere. Shoes aren't really natural because but everyone wears them. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's just about looking at things from a perspective of, okay, we're in 2022, we have amazing technology, we have food grade supplements that can provide us with the nutrition. Actually, what's also funny is that feedlots, particularly factory farmed animals, are actually supplemented with B12. Because B12 is not inherently found in animal products, it's found in the soil.
Yeah, that's it.
Because our soils are so deficient nowadays, we're not able to get that bacteria. So
we're even feeding our animals.
Exactly.
B12.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that was it. That was what I was touching on, because I think the theories are, back in the day, we didn't really clean our food as well. So, we got vitamin B12 again from soil around sort of, potatoes and things. Yeah. So you could have been a vegan back in medieval times. You didn't have to have access to livestock to eat. But yeah, I think it's quite a fascinating one. I'm not sure it fully holds true. I wouldn't say that's a reason to go and tuck into a piece of steak every single night.
Exactly.
If you want to tuck into a steak for a different reason, that's
exactly.
definitely that's on you. So we started with a little bit of the nutrition. You've given us a bit of your background, and I originally approached you to do the podcast to discuss plant-based nutrition from an angle of mental health, and we'll definitely get into that. But when we met, I learned a lot about you, and you've got quite an interesting story, shall we say, and you've been through a lot, particularly in the last year.
Yeah.
And I know you haven't really spoken about this on a podcast before.
Yeah.
So let's go at your own pace. But can you tell us a little bit about what's been going on in the last year in your own words?
Yeah. So it's definitely been a journey of rebuilding. So I was unfortunately widowed in November last year, having been married. I got married in 2021. May, and then she unfortunately passed away in November 2021.
Right.
And I guess it's not something that you ever expect to experience as a 33-year-old. Do you know what I mean? You never ever see that kind of thing coming. And I think there's a wider argument as to whether humans are really actually prepared for death, and I don't think we are. But in the circumstances that happened, it was obviously, shattered my world, to say the least. I can't really say too much more about, how much that kind of was, how much it devastated me, how much it kind of just shifted my entire world around. And I think, it was definitely a process of trying to rebuild, trying to make sense of what happened, trying to understand, and kind of just try and forge a new path, really, try and see how life was going to go without her. Because I think in many ways, a lot of what I do, is very much down to her. Like, she had so much belief in me when, just before we'd met, I'd, been trying to play professional football and it wasn't really working out for me. And I ended up being quite bitter in my life. And, I met her and she was just like a shining light in my life, So I have so much gratitude for having actually been able to be with a person like that. And, of course, it was a definite rebuild job. You have to come to a place of acceptance of it, which I eventually did after a few months. And I think for me now is just to try and continue to lean into my purpose, which is, educating people about nutrition, educating people about health and wellness, and even using part of this story to be like, you can go through certain things, you can have certain setbacks in your life, you can experience real trauma, but they can also be a catalyst in your life. They can be a catalyst for either your evolution or your, devolution in many ways. And I do think we have that choice. And I think she would like to have seen me make the choice that I've made, which is to try and push forward with my life, to, honor her in so many ways, but to continue moving forward and, just trying to continue to live in purpose. I mean, obviously it's been a crazy time, but I'm in an incredible place at the moment. I'm in a really good place. And as I said, it's, friends, family have obviously been there and been incredible. And, some of the stuff that I've done, which we'll talk about in terms of like the psychedelics and, reading some certain books, which was hugely, hugely impactful in my life. I think Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl was like probably the best book that I've ever read.
Yeah, incredible.
Really helped me in that period. There was a lot of tools that I relied on, nutrition, training, things like that, and make sure I, try to keep myself feeling as good as possible. And I'm really kind of happy with where I am today.
It is incredible. And I just want to say hats off to you as a person for having the mindset that you do. And I think that's really the crux of what I want to find out today is and give to people is those little bits and bobs that you've picked up, because you've sort of gone through something that, like you say, no one is prepared for. I think we as humans, but particularly in the UK, I can only really speak for the UK, but I know that we're particularly bad at this sort of thing is we're really bad at talking about death.
Yes, we are.
Like we hide away from it in all conversations. Like I've spoken to tons of people about this, but like how many people have ever spoken to their parents or grandparents about what they want when it comes to like that end of life? And this is a different situation, obviously, but you know, even when you're approaching that sort of potential end of life, I know that we don't speak about it as a family. And I know that in many other circumstances, other people I know, they don't talk about it, even though it's probably much more likely in the next few years when you're that sort of age. You know, you get into your 70s and 80s. And we shy away from it. And I think that's because of lots of different reasons. I mean, I guess who we sort of are as people, as Brits. But we have no training, we have no preparation on it. It's something that I've been lucky enough to sort of see in my job and my role. And that gives you a bit of a different perspective, and I guess also numbs you a little bit to that sort of the reality, harsh reality of it. But I think if we did talk about it more, we would probably be better at dealing with it.
100%.
You also mention this word purpose, and I absolutely love like the word purpose. I spoke about it recently with my friend George on the sofa. Tell me a bit about like your purpose.
So it's funny because, as I said, growing up, I always wanted to just play professional football. That was all I wanted to do. That was all I was interested in. I played a lot of semi-pro. Got my foot into the door at a few clubs abroad. Went to Norway, went to Austria, went to the United States. Didn't quite get to where I really wanted to get to, and I guess that's where I had a decision to make in terms of where I was going to.
With so many footballers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a huge problem, actually.
And I had the kind of this thought as to, okay, so where's my life now going to go? And then, as I said, I met Jas, and then, just started kind of opening myself up to new things. Started around about that sort of 6 months later after we met, that was when I went plant-based, and that was, a real turning point for me in many ways, because that was when I then started to obviously learn about things. And, I then started writing for a health and wellness magazine for free, just to get some experience with it. And I think that was when I really started to find the love for conveying health and wellness information. And it was not just, specific to being plant-based, but it was around women's health, actually. So I was writing about a lot of things, like lack of women in clinical trials and different things like that. So really interesting stuff. And I just really started to just develop like a real love for it, a real passion for obviously plant-based nutrition, but also just really making health information accessible for people and breaking it down and just explaining things. And I really know that this is my purpose now, because when, I've got quite a big community on social media, and I speak to a lot of people. I try and speak to as many people and respond to as many people as I can. And, some of the messages that I get from people saying that, I've greatly helped them, or, I post a recipe and I'll get a message saying, I've been really off track with my diet in the last few months, but I've seen this recipe and it's really got me back on track. Like, thank you so much. And the feeling that gives me, I just get such a sense of pride from that. Yeah. And that's how I know that this is something that I'm meant to do. So I think where having that purpose was so important, particularly in this last year, was that it stopped me from just kind of retreating into a corner or into a hole, which I think in many ways I would have been probably validated to do so, going through something as terrible as that. But I wanted to continue with it. Obviously, I wanted to take a bit of time away from social media, be with friends and family and things like that. But I wanted to continue. I felt like I'm always going to have unfinished business in terms of trying to reach as many people as possible with this message of, plant-based nutrition, how it can be beneficial for your health, how it can, optimize your health in so many ways. And I just wanted to continue with that. So I think purpose is really important. And I'm fortunate because not everyone has a purpose in their life. If you go out and speak to the majority of people in society, and ask them what their purpose is, they might not know. So I feel lucky in that I came across and stumbled across it essentially. And I've just kind of really wanted to just develop that understanding of it to be able to help other people and be of service to other people. So I'm just really passionate about that in so many ways.
I know you can tell, and I echo what you're saying there, and I've got several thoughts that I want to sort of build on that. That I'm actually starting a project at the moment that is going to be aimed at young people at schools. And through the research that we've done, there's been 3 key areas that we found. And one of them was mind, so mental health. One of them's body, which I've spoken to you about sort of nutrition. And then the other one was purpose. And I just think it would be wonderful if we had something at school or some sort of tool that we're actually building at the moment that can help people with those 3 areas. And the purpose one is something I've never seen before. And it's not something that I ever had at school. And I think could be really beneficial, because I actually think purpose and mind, mental health, are intrinsically linked so closely. If you don't feel like you have direction, you don't feel like what you do on a day-to-day basis has meaning, it's very easy to fall off the path. It's, you have to have so many other things going on in your life going great. And as soon as you build in, the global situation, think about the Ukraine war, you think about the government,
the pound.
the pounds, sinking by the day. So as soon as those sort of things happen, if you don't have that thing to go back to that gives you the buzz, gives you that feeling, it hits different. It hits different than anything else. Doing something that is your purpose, and then getting the sort of the feedback from that from others. Particularly if my second point is that there's 2 other themes that always come up when it's purpose, and every time you speak to someone, it's quite often that these themes are what their purpose is about. And the first one is connection and feeling like you're helping others. So I know for me, my purpose isn't necessarily one thing, but it revolves around like helping others, connecting with others. And the same goes for most people I've ever met. And then the second part is that creativity and being able to sort of express yourself. And so you said there you started writing, and you're just doing it for free and for the sake of it. And that using your brain in that sense, I think, is another really sort of intrinsically linked part to purpose. You mentioned something there before when you were talking. You said psychedelics, and I want to delve into this growth mindset that you have. This sort of really sort of strong set of attitudes and beliefs that you clearly have been able to show over the last year, despite dealing with all of the sort of potential trauma and difficulties that you have. And psychedelics, is that something that you have done in the last year that have helped you achieve that? And on top of that, is there anything else that you can build into that for us?
Yeah. So, I mean, even before everything had happened, I'd kind of started to become a bit more aware of, psychedelics, and I'd watched a few documentaries, Fantastic Fungi, and obviously we've watched the recent one, How to Change Your Mind. And then there was another couple and some other videos that I'd watched, and I'd started microdosing actually. I think it was in early 2021.
What are you microdosing here with, or what psychedelics are you talking about? Psilocybin.
Yeah. And really just started noticing some creative benefits in terms of my creativity was, kind of actually starting to increase. So for example, if I was to get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I'd have all these ideas about like emails that I could write or content that I could do. So I'd have to quickly write them down and then go back to sleep, in a bit of enhanced focus as well. So I definitely noticed some like interesting benefits, but at that time I wasn't ready to do like a dose which was really going to kind of open everything up for me. Because obviously, as we know, with regards to psychedelics at a microdosing level, it's very sub-perceptual. You're not going to have any kind of like visuals or anything like that. And then obviously everything happened, and I think before that, again, not too long before it, I'd started just becoming more and more aware of it and more cool to it. I just had to watch Fantastic Fungi, and that kind of blew my mind. It's probably one of the best documentaries that I'd ever watched. But again, I just knew that this is not something to rush into. Like, if it's meant to happen at some point, there'll be a reason for it. And of course, obviously, everything happened, and again, I just kept on feeling just a bit more and more cool to it. And I wasn't really, as I said, I wasn't ready to just dive into it. I wanted everything to be right. And then I got the opportunity, I believe it was in February, to do it. And again, I'd been, as I said, it was about like a year and a half where just, researching everything and trying to get as much of an understanding as possible about it, because you don't want to just go into something without any kind of knowledge, or, of course you don't necessarily know what to expect, but you still want to be prepared to some degree, and you want to get the best possible experience out of it. So I went in with like a number of intentions in terms of, wanting to get an understanding of why things had happened the way that it happened. How was my life going to be going forward? What was my life going to be without her? And it was a very, very, very powerful experience. And people ask me to describe it, but I can't, and I almost don't want to, because that's just my experience. Everyone's experience is going to be very, very different. And I also don't ever tell people, oh, you should do this or you should do that when it comes to these things, because that's a choice that people are going to have to come to make themselves. But I got a lot of answers. And it was definitely, as I said, with a number of the different tools that I used, make sure that my nutrition was dialed in, make sure I was, got back to my training, reading the books. I read, as I said, Man's Search for Meaning. And then there was another book called Option B. This was by Sheryl Sandberg. She's the COO of Meta, I believe. And her husband passed suddenly while they were on holiday. So she just wrote a book all about that. And again, that hugely validated my position and where I was standing, because when you're going through that kind of grief, you just think that you were the only person in the world going through it. And you read something like that and you like, wow, okay, this happened to someone else on a crazy level. She had kids and all these kinds of things, and I didn't have kids. So this was just another tool in terms of the psilocybin to really kind of get an understanding of what happened, to really come to a place of acceptance, to really come to a place of, understanding that, terrible things happen in this life, but there's almost sometimes maybe not reasons behind it, but there's reasons to still look forward and try and, continue to live your life, because there is still a lot of life left to live. I'm only 34. So yeah, it was a really, really powerful tool. And I think one that definitely gave me a lot of value and just an understanding of so many different things that had happened, and understanding of a lot of my emotions during that period as well.
So this series, I've been lucky enough to partner with one of my favorite brands, Heights. In an ideal world, we would all eat a diverse, nutritionally complete diet that ensures we meet all of our nutritional requirements. However, if you're anything like me, you'll know that life likes to get in the way, and that's not always possible. That's where Heights and their Smart Supplement comes in as the best insurance policy for looking after me and my brain. The Smart Supplement consists of just 2 easy capsules taken every day and has been formulated by neuroscientist Dr. Tara Swart and dietitian Sophie Medlin. The all-vegan capsules are packed with 20 essential vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and healthy fats, which are designed to support your brain, nervous system, immune system, and even your sleep. I personally noticed an improvement in my focus, boosting my energy levels. I'm more motivated than ever on my goals, and I even make it to the gym more often when I take Heights. So if you want to get started with brain care, Heights are giving all of my listeners a 15% off your first quarterly subscription with the code StraightTalking. Head to yourheights.com and use the code StraightTalking and start taking care of your brain and body today. So you say you sort of got answers from this experience, plus the other things that you did. From my reading and understanding and speaking to other people who have done therapy, particularly the guys at Nishama that I visited recently in America, they talk about this concept of integration. So integration is sort of where you work with the therapist. If you go and do, one of the ketamine retreats or the ketamine clinic infusions, or if it's another psychedelic, as many of those will probably be becoming legal over the next few years. But integration is where you discuss and you work out. How did you go about integrating for yourself? Did you get the answer straight away? Was it like, oh, I understand now, like whilst you were tripping? Or was it like over a period of time as you read things, your brain worked in a different way? How did that sort of work?
So I actually got quite a lot of the answers during that period, during that sort of 4 or 5 hour period.
Wow.
And I had notes, I had a notebook, so I was writing everything down. So for me, the key part of that integration process was actually just referring a lot back to what I'd written down and just kind of integrating it and wanting to adopt a lot of the things that were coming up into my life. So, and I think the integration piece is really important, because it's not something that you should just do and then just be like, okay, yeah, this is all good. You should just do it and really take some time to almost meditate on it and discuss things. And I mean, therapy was also one of the other things that I did. To be fair, I'd started therapy before she passed, just to try and become a better human being. No matter how well,
we should all do it.
Yeah, no matter how well adjusted to society you are, I think everyone can benefit from therapy.
Yeah, just getting your thoughts out there with someone else helping you.
Exactly. So that was brilliant. Something that I did. We didn't actually discuss this or what I'd done. I kind of almost wanted to navigate that journey by myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said, so many notes that I took and so many different kind of viewpoints and just different like things to almost like beacons of light to just kind of focus on, so many different areas that I could kind of dip my feet, dip my toes into. And I still try and adopt them as often as possible today.
Do you look back at the notebook at all?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And
it's really interesting. It's really interesting.
It's a really cool little like takeaway to have. I mean, as a caveat, psilocybin is still illegal in the UK, right? And we're not here talking and telling, like you said before, we're not telling people to do this. it's against the law at the moment. I mean, there is safety profiles done in the clinical trials. It's a very safe drug overall, but it also is profoundly powerful. And done in the wrong way can really mess with your mental health as well. You know, it's not something to be messed around with lightly. But over the next few years, it's likely to be seen more and more, I think, alongside a lot of the other psychedelics.
I think so.
The current mental health crisis is a sort of perfect wind, like it's perfect sort of hurricane storm for it, you know, and that you've got a lot of pressure and a lot of sort of financial backing now as well. The current studies, to you know, build on that, the current studies looking at psilocybin, they're looking at lots of different causes of mental health. So they're looking at, you know, some sort of PTSD, they're looking at depression, anxiety, and tons of other things. You've used psilocybin in a way which is a little bit different, I guess. It's like, it's a fresh trauma, but it's like sort of dealing with grief. And I just wonder, like, what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, I think it's something that, as I said, for me, helped me hugely, you know, because I guess I'm someone who tries to intellectualize a lot of things. I always want to understand something. Anything that's happened, I want to really get to the depths of why this has happened. Even something like this, which I guess you'll never really find all of the answers as to why it's happened, because, you know, there are certain things that are beyond our understanding, and, you know, only God knows certain things, you know. But I think it's something that, for me, I felt was really, really useful. And as I said, you know, it's typically not used for, or people don't typically go and use it for things like grief. And that's not to say it's going to, you know, eliminate certain things, because of course grief is like a lifelong process, but you can just get answered in that moment. Like, there are certain times even now where I'm thinking, you know, I'm in a great place, but I sometimes think, wow, that actually happened in my life. That is crazy. And then you might have a bit of despondency, or, you know, whether there's certain milestones that you may have had or something that will remind me of her. Like, that's just grief. That's just a constant, like, undertone, even though, like, I've built, you know, there was something that I saw on TikTok, I can't remember, this doctor who said, like, when you build your life, when you come out of grief, it's almost like the grief never goes away. It's almost like that black hole. And then you can just, you know, it's got this like a illustration, like loads of different colors around it, and you can build a life around it and still live a beautiful life. So yeah, I just felt that it was just really useful to look at it from that perspective. And I think, because grief is something that is quite difficult to navigate. People maybe can't understand it. I think, I don't know if you saw, there was a Huberman Lab podcast on grief, which was really interesting, actually. Very, very interesting, and looked at, you know, why certain people struggle to deal with it in comparison to others. So there are so many tools out there, and of course they're never going to be able to just make the thing go away, which is not the point of what you're trying to do. You're just trying to manage it, because you're never going to be able to erase that experience as it happened. But I think I got to a point where I was like, you know, okay, this experience, I've accepted it. How can I now use this in the best possible way to try and, you know, live the best possible life, you know, lean further into my purpose, and maybe, you know, even with things like this and in this discussion that we're having, maybe inspire someone else who's going through something similar along the way. So
I'm sure it will. It's really interesting what you say there about sort of like, you don't want to erase it. And I think it's a really interesting concept. And it was actually on a podcast, The Diary of a CEO, Maisie Williams is on it today. And she had a very traumatic childhood. And he asks her, would you want to erase it? She said, absolutely not. And she struggled to articulate a little bit on why not. But I think what you've sort of alluded to there, and your mindset, if you're able to develop that growth mindset, as much as she sort of says there's horrible things happen to everyone at certain points, and you might have it when you're early in life, no one deserves it. You might have it later in life, no one deserves it. But if you're able to have that mindset, those things that happened, they happened to you, and they formed who you are now. And although it may be riddled and stuck with loads of negative emotion to it, they still make you who you are. If you have the mindset of growth, and if you have the mindset of seeing these things as learning opportunities, what are they teaching you? Then, you know, you're kind of bulletproof in a lot of ways. You know, you're always sort of growing, and I think that's really key. Exactly that.
I'm reading a book at the moment from Ryan Holiday called "The Obstacle Is the Way," and I think, you know, reading a lot of what he talks about, and obviously he's, you know, so he's basically, you know, brought stoicism to the mainstream essentially, and almost adopting quite a stoic outlook on it, in terms of, yes, we can't control what happens to us in life, and there are certain things that are going to be horrendous that happen to us, but we can control how we come out of it on the other side. We do have that choice to make, where we can, as I said, we can allow it to destroy us, or we can allow it to, further fuel that growth within us. And of course, if I was to say, like, if someone was to ask me, would you ever wanted that to happen? Of course, I would never wanted that to happen. But by the same token, I don't want to erase that, because that's a part of who I am now, you know? And as I said, how can I use it for good? I can potentially inspire someone who's going through something similar. Like I had a couple of messages on social, or more than a couple, I've had a few messages on social media, some months back, and people saying that, you're really inspiring and thank you for being so vulnerable, and it's helping me with stuff that I'm going through. So actually, when you realize that maybe this isn't just about me and it's about the wider society and the impact that, my experiences maybe have on someone else, you then kind of get to a place where you're like, okay, this is really terrible what's happened to me on a personal level, but can I use this for growth, and can I use this for purpose that can maybe help some more people, and then ultimately, continue to fuel my own rebuild and recovery. Do you know what I mean?
Perhaps some people have to go through immense pain and suffering so that other people don't. You know, and I'm not a big one to think that, everything's already this fate and this destiny and everything's set out, but, it's a lovely way to think about things that perhaps there is a bigger picture, what you said there. It's not just about me. The world feels very much like just about you, because we live in our own head. Everything that happens is your own perception, right? Other than the laws of gravity, everything else you make up in your head. And so it's very easy to get stuck in that little me box. But actually, to flip it on its head and think that, all right, I am now a much better person. I'm better at dealing with things because I've been through this trauma. I've took the blow so that I can help other people not. And I think that's probably sort of quite a nice attitude to take, although it probably feels a bit more difficult when you've just gone through something.
I mean, it's like, for me, I think, certain people might, and I'd understand it's maybe somewhat easier said than done, because again, I want to caveat this and be clear, like, it is a very, very difficult thing to go through. I wouldn't want to wish that on anyone. I often think about everyone who was involved who lost her, whether it's family or friends or whatever. And I even sometimes think, wow, like that must be really tough for them, even though it's also happened for me as well, which is weird. So look, I'm not saying that people should, you got to do this and everything that I've done, you'll be fine. Absolutely not. Like I can completely understand in a situation where someone loses someone really close to them, why they would turn to things like alcohol and drugs and things like that to numb that pain, because that pain is not something that anyone should ever go through. But ultimately, I think one of the things that I realize is that actually everyone is going to go through that kind of pain to a varying degree, because, no one makes it out of here alive. We're all going to pass away. Our parents are going to pass away. Our, relatives, elderly relatives, everyone's going to pass away, and everyone has to deal with that at a certain moment. And to even touch on what you were saying at the start, like, we don't actually speak about these things. We don't speak about death, even though it is a reality and it's going to happen to every single person. So I think one of the things that we can potentially do is actually start having these conversations around death. That might actually be a way to be able to deal with it better. Because if we don't have a conversation about it, if we don't bring it to the table, we almost believe that it's just not going to happen. And then when it happens, we just lose our minds. So it's almost like we've got to rewire our brains into having these conversations about the reality of what's going to happen to our parents, to our friends, to us. And that would maybe give us a better chance of being able to deal with it in a better way.
So many people turn to alcohol, drugs, etc. And I think they tend to be people that have a couple of things. They have less clarity on their purpose or meaning. And they perhaps, if they have had a big loss, they really identify as being so intertwined with that person, so reliant that they, when that part of them goes, it's like,
there goes.
They go. And I think as much as we love the people in our lives, you need to be really clear and important on who you are as a person, what defines you. And I was actually listening to Dr. Chatterjee, one of my big inspirations, and he was talking about how he's not, he doesn't associate himself as purely a father. It's the biggest thing in his life, bigger than being a doctor, but he isn't just a father. So the way he describes it, and I think it's a lovely way to describe it, is describing yourself in values. So who you are as a person. So my values, I've said before, are like purpose, connection, consistency, and growth. Those four. And so those values are a little bit more of a broader context rather than I am the boyfriend to Bex, or I am a doctor. Because if you lose your job as a doctor, or Bex walks out on me, then, you know, I'm able to still say, okay, that hurts, but I am a person of growth. I'm a person of purpose or connection. And, you know, you're a little bit, you're better positioned to then move and adapt to these challenges that you've got in your life.
Exactly that. And I think that's probably looking at it from that. I mean, I haven't heard this podcast. I'm sure we'll talk about it when we're having dinner later, but I think that is a really, really good way to look at things. And maybe that's, you know, subconsciously how I actually looked at it. Of course, you know, I had insurmountable amounts of love for Jas, and we had an incredible relationship. Also, by the same token, I think, I had these set of values that I wanted to live by, you know, honesty, integrity, growth is really the biggest one, because I guess if you don't have a growth mindset, you go through something really tumultuous and you maybe wouldn't be able to find that direction to be able to fuel that growth. So for me, it was, as I said, it was, you know, a huge blow. I can't really explain it in words really, but after I came to that place of acceptance, I was like, okay, I've got my purpose. I've got my desire to grow. I've got my desire to continue to impact other people. I've got my desire to continue to want to be of service, to find new experiences in life. And I think those things help to shape my path going forward. And you can't see the path whilst you're kind of there. You're taking it one day at a time. But I think those elements of my character, I felt it was always going to lead me to finding a way out of it. And I was journaling at the time when it happened. And a couple of months ago, I actually came across my journals and I was reading them just to kind of see where, you know, things were at and kind of where I'm now. And of course, you know, the words of a broken man, but one thing that I kept on saying was that I will rise above it. I will come through this. So I had that feeling that I would, even as early on as, you know, in the weeks after, like, because I knew I just would not want to stay in that place forever. I would want to be in a place eventually where I could look back at it and be like, you know what, I use this for growth and to continue to fuel my purpose and hopefully do it proud as well.
Amazing. Before we move too further down into sort of nutrition again, what do you think the future holds then for psychedelics? You've seen how much they've helped you. What are your thoughts?
I think that it's long overdue in terms of their incorporation into the mainstream. Of course, there's probably, you know, financial implications and pharmaceutical companies, whether that has an impact on their bottom line from a perspective of the medications that they produce. But I think if we're really trying to help society, we at least have to give these to people as an option. They have to have these things as an option. I posted something on my Instagram stories the other day about, I think it was 2 doses of psilocybin and psychotherapy dramatically reduced alcohol dependence.
Yeah, I've seen that study,
middle-aged adults. Like, this is huge. You know, so many people struggle with alcohol dependence. Alcohol is the most destructive drug in society. I believe there was a study done in the Lancet in 2010 which looked at alcohol. It was higher than like heroin and, you know, all these other things. And obviously mushrooms was right at the bottom in terms of, you know, its danger to society, because, as I said, it's, you know, in the studies that have been done, it's largely very, very safe. So I would just like to see this, you know, in the mainstream and really helping people and at least have people have the option to, you know, to resort to these things. And that's not to say that it's going to just dramatically change things for everyone, but I believe it has capacity to dramatically change things for a lot of people.
I completely agree. From what I've seen from the literature and the research, that study, like you mentioned there, alcohol is by far the most widely used drug in the world, I think, other than, I think, caffeine. And it is glorified. And we also rely on it to socialize, which at its core, if you really think about it, is pretty sad. We all grow up going to parties. That's where we socialize. You associate that with drink, you get tipsy, you get your confidence. But unfortunately, over time, that becomes a reliance on that. So you might not be alcohol dependent, but you might be dependent on alcohol to have a good time. And dependent on alcohol to feel comfortable enough to chat to someone you don't really know that well. Or even someone, for a lot of people, someone you do know well. And that's got to be a massive shift. Like, I feel like that has to start to change in some way for us to really move on. And I think people do grow out of that, but also a lot of people don't. And it's very sad. It comes with so many negative effects. You know, I've spent enough time on gastroenterology wards in hospital to see the damaging effects of alcohol. Plus what it does in terms of, you know, more from a social and mental health perspective to families and everything. So So if we have options with psychedelics, if that's a more accepted route to improving our relationships with substances. So if people could use, go and have a therapy on the NHS or not on the NHS that says, that shows that they reduce their dependence on alcohol, that's got to be a good thing, right? And so the safety profiles, as I mentioned before, look very, very good. All the trials look good, and the evidence for them working is also pretty good.
Yeah, for me, I think I would like to think it's a matter of time, but I guess we'll have to see. But the evidence is clear. We're seeing so much, so many strides forward in the clinical research. Obviously, my own personal experience, I can definitely attest to that, and I'd just like to see it continue to move forward in a progressive way to help people ultimately.
I've been doing a lot of talking to people within the space because it's something I'm interested in, and I'm pretty sure it will happen.
Yeah.
I think we're a little bit further behind in the UK. The US seems a little bit further down the line, and look like maybe over the next 2 years you'll have psilocybin therapy in the US, maybe places like Amsterdam as well.
Yeah.
So plant-based nutrition then. Yeah. Let's get back there. Your social media has blown up. Congrats. When I think I followed you, 10 to 15,000 followers maybe. And then now over the last couple of months, I remember last time I met you, had just gone through the roof and over 100,000. So really well done, because I know you work really hard, and I actually think your content is one of the best out there, because you make plant-based nutrition look very easy, but also very aesthetically pleasing, which I think is really important on this world of this instant gratification, dopamine. You need to get people to stop scrolling. Why are you so passionate about plant-based nutrition then?
I think it's mainly because of how it benefited me. And as I said, when I shifted to a plant-based diet, a lot of the changes that I noticed straight away, just an enhanced level of like mental clarity, more energy. I was sleeping so much better. I felt lighter. And as I said, I felt like I was really just eating in alignment with who I maybe truly am in many ways. And I was like, I'm going to just keep doing this. And actually, it wasn't until, so I went plant-based in sort of around August 2017, as I mentioned. And then it wasn't until, I think, a year later, because I was a very reluctant social media user. I wasn't really on social media at all. I initially started to, obviously when I moved away from football, I initially started to do it for, doing a couple of modeling shots, but that wasn't really me. So I kind of just scrapped that and sacked that off. And then I slowly started to share some recipes, slowly started to share some of the information that I was kind of garnering from a lot of the research and the studies that I was looking at. And it started to get a bit of, decent traction. And I never had any idea to kind of grow it into anything huge or make money from it or anything like that. I was just like sharing stuff. I was like, I've learned new stuff. I want to share it with other people and see, what they think.
Aligning with your purpose, right?
Exactly. It was free from agenda completely. It was just like, I want to just help people, nothing in return. And then, as I said, it just started to grow. And then, over the last couple of years, it got to like, 10, 15K, 20K towards the start of the year. And then, recently I've done a couple of posts, one around sleep and one around like an ancient grain called teff. I made a teff porridge. And then there was another video that I did about my top 5 plant-based protein. And they seemed to perform pretty well. And then they just kind of got a whole load of new people into the community. And then it kind of just grew pretty dramatically. So it was quite wild at the time, but I think it was nice to see, because I don't care about the numbers so much. For me, it doesn't really bother me. But one thing I do care about is actually there are people with interest in terms of bettering themselves, bettering their health, bettering their lifestyle, being more aware of things that they can take and adopt to move forward in a better way. So again, that's something that I don't take lightly. I want to keep putting out positive information. Making the food aesthetically pleasing helps, of course, because people then stop. But if I put some really good information in the caption that they can maybe learn from or share with a friend or share with a family member, then, I'm really pleased. That's something that really does please me. So long may that continue. And as I said, for me, it's always just going to be an extension of my passion for it. It's never, I need to make this post because I want to get X money. Like the amount of, opportunities and stuff that I turn down financially because they just don't really align with what I'm wanting to do. I'm not just going to take on some paid partnership just because it's paying, 3-4 figures, whatever. I just don't need to do that. What I want to do is continue to impact people for the long term. There's no real point in starting to go on this, journey of doing all these ads and getting all this money. And then that dilutes my message and doesn't really, it doesn't give any people any value. And people will cotton onto that and be like, oh, he's seeing us just customers. Like, they kind of switch off. But I want to have longevity with what I'm doing. So if that means turning down some money in the short term for that long term, being able to build what I'm trying to build, or continue building what I'm trying to build, and I'll take that every day of the week.
Yeah, we'll keep it up. Yeah, absolutely loving it at the moment. There are arguments that are very well known for going plant-based, particularly from an ethical standpoint, environmental standpoint, amongst many others. I want to talk, as this podcast is based about mental health usually, is there a reason from a mental health perspective that we should be eating plant-based food?
I definitely think from a mental health standpoint, we should be eating more plant foods for sure. I think there's definitely a lot of information out there. There was a study, I think it was in 2020, I believe it's called Evidence of the Importance of Dietary Habits Regarding Depressive Symptoms and Depression. Meta-analysis looked at 20 studies across the board and showed that high adherence to an anti-inflammatory diet, so plenty of dark leafy greens, omega-3s, other micronutrients such as magnesium, folic acid, fatty acids, either from fish or from algae oil, were associated with a reduced risk of depression. So those micronutrients, they're abundantly found in plant foods: magnesium, folic acid, folate, lutein in dark leafy greens as well. Anthocyanins in berries, linked to cognitive performance, walnuts, avocado, the monounsaturated fats in those. So I think it's really important to get more plants into the diet. It's funny, there have been certain studies that have said that vegans are at increased risk of depression, but of course you have to look at the dietary pattern. You can do a vegan diet, but really badly, one that focuses on processed foods. And we know that processed foods, in terms of how they modulate your gut bacteria, that's going to have a huge impact on your mental health. So diet quality is what matters. And that anti-inflammatory diet, whether that's a Mediterranean style diet, a plant-focused diet, a well-planned plant-based diet, these are all going to give you really, really good benefits from a mental health standpoint.
That's fascinating that you mentioned the microbiome, something I've not spoken about for a long time, actually, but Tim Spector is someone to follow if you like that. His organisation is called Zoe. But the microbiome is intrinsically linked to our mental health as well as our general health. And my understanding, although not a full expert in this, but my understanding is the more fibre that we give, more insoluble fibre and different types of fibre, variety, the more we feed our gut bugs. So if you think of it as like we're giving our food that we don't necessarily digest with our cells, our bacteria start digesting, gives them more food, it allows them to sort of replicate more, gives us a greater variety of gut bugs. And the more variety of gut bugs, it's such a complex little bit of science, the microbiome, but the more gut bugs we have, that's what we know is the beneficial part to our health. And I've definitely seen, so it's all about diversity, isn't it?
And what you get as well is that, as I said, we feed our gut bugs, they then almost dispense these like pharmaceutical, like short chain fatty acids, which have butyrate, acetate, propionate. Huge benefits for disease prevention, reduced risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So that's really, really important to get that diversity into the gut bacteria for sure.
Feed the bugs and they will score.
That's it. Exactly.
So for someone who has maybe been won over, they've listened to you and they thought, this guy sounds like he knows what he's on about. Maybe I should put down the burgers and start to introduce some more plant-based foods. How do they go about starting?
You've got to start slow. I think particularly if you're coming from a place where you are eating maybe a processed food diet, you've been doing this for however many years, you've got to start really, really slow. You may end up feeling some initial benefits, but I think that's mainly because you've gone from a processed food diet to an unprocessed food diet. So you've then got to really think about certain nutrients that you want to get in, focus on the key ones: B12, vitamin D, omega-3, DHA, EPA. But try not to overwhelm yourself too early on. You want to just get a handful of recipes under your belt, and whether that's just an early breakfast one, like an oatmeal with nuts, seeds, plant protein and some fruit, or like a tofu scramble or something like that. Easy dinners like lentil bolognese, things like that. Just get those under your belt. Start to experiment with those, get those in. And even if it's like a meatless Monday or maybe 2 days a week you go plant-based, that will really give you a foundation, because one of the things that I see a lot of is people diving right into it. And then they just drown, and then they have to kind of go back to what they know best. So you have to start really, really slow. And I think, of course, there are the ethical and environmental considerations for it, but I think it's also really important to look at for yourself as well. Fuel your body in the best possible way. So making sure that you're, as I said, eating as unprocessed a plant-based diet as possible, because as I said, you can go with the Beyond Burgers and all that kind of stuff. And while there are they are somewhat of a decent like segue and almost a ladder for certain people into the plant-based lifestyle. I don't think these are foods that people should be having as a staple of their diet, day in, day out.
Yeah.
Once in a while, cool, but you want to be getting diversity of plants into your diet and focusing on that diversity. Once you start to get comfortable with it, start to look to see if you can get like 30 to 35 different plants into your diet per week, herbs and spices included, and that will help to modulate your gut bacteria. So I think, the key one is really starting slow and then kind of building from there.
And starting slow, if we just suddenly start eating a ton of fiber, we're eating like, 30 grams plus or more a day, suddenly out of nowhere, and we were on sort of, very, very few grams of fiber, you're going to notice some gut symptoms. And it's not fun for anyone. And it's quite easy to put yourself and say, well, I'm not cut out for this.
Exactly.
And so I think those tips there of starting slow, but also just focus on like what meal you're going to have at breakfast, what's your lunch and what's your dinner. Maybe have 2 of each of those and just rotate them for a few weeks and just see how you're going. Then build them in, and suddenly before you know it, you're adept at eating a plant-based diet. So you've been plant-based now for 4 or 5 years?
5 years now.
So 5 years. So when you first started, particularly, what sort of things did you do to make sure that it was easy to stick to it?
I don't know, for me, I felt really, really compelled. I was like, with the evidence that I'd seen and what I'd started to look into, I was like, this is for me. So I didn't ever really stray away from the path or feel like I want to go back to eating meat, which for me, again, is another kind of reason as to why I feel like, this is kind of linked to my purpose. I just felt this is it. I'm feeling really compelled to it. Again, for me, I think it's important to really just get a little bit of research and a little bit of knowledge under your belt. And there are so many different resources online, Google and even Instagram and even things like TikTok. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of TikTok, but you can find some decent information on there. So for me, it was just a case of like the education piece, just getting that little bit of nutrition information under my belt. Obviously, I went way in. I went really, really deep in, but not everyone has to do that to do a plant-based diet pretty well. You just need to know the basics. So, just learning and there were certain things that kind of were an issue for me. So for example, the calories, I've spoken about this a lot on social media, where because plant-based foods are less calorie dense than meat, if you don't eat a greater volume of food, you might end up losing a little bit of weight. And I lost like 1 or 2 kilos, but I ended up putting that back on really quickly. So yeah, that's just really it. I kind of just, stuck to it and never really felt like I was going to stray away from the path. And I was just so focused on making sure that, right, I'm now going to be cooking a lot as well. Before I forget that, I mean, making sure that you cook, because it's not really a lifestyle that caters to convenience much. Yes, there are plenty of good vegan restaurants out there, but you're not going to be eating out all the time. So making sure you cook, that's a really, really big one.
That's what I found difficult when I'm being well behaved and I try and go plant-based, is when you're out and about, it suddenly becomes incredibly difficult. And, I think it's naive to think everyone's going to have not necessarily always the time. I think we have more time than we think, but it's if you're not in the mode, if you're not used to prepping your meals, etc., or prepping snacks that are vegan, then it's difficult. And you're in a shop and you're looking at things and it's like, okay, I've got some really poor vegan options or really processed vegan options. Or, my healthy option is actually something that isn't plant-based. And I think that's where it becomes difficult. So that is the last bit, I think, is getting used to just cooking that food in, I guess, more bulk as well. You mentioned you lost a little bit of weight, and I think it's probably important just to touch on one of the big worries with lots of people, particularly people that are active, go to the gym, is that they don't get enough protein in a plant-based diet. How do people get around that?
I mean, it's very straightforward. I think there is this myth that, if you eat enough calories, you're going to get enough protein. And I think that's something that people should ignore completely, particularly if you're trying to put lean muscle on, because you want to be intentional with your protein sources. You want to make sure that you're getting, everyone uses plant protein powder, particularly if you train, or any protein powder. Make sure you get a good quality one, preferably a one that's like a blend of pea and hemp, or pea and brown rice, pea and brown rice specifically, which is really, really comparable to whey. And then of course also lifting to make sure that you're getting that stimulus. But other things like tofu, tempeh, make sure that they're organic and non-GMO, lentils and seitan. Those are really going to give you like the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to really good quality protein sources. Tempeh and seitan, probably the top 2 for me. And then you've got like supplementary proteins, as I call them. So things like hemp seeds, beans, quinoa, oats, edamame, things that you can also sneak into your meals just to increase that protein content. Actually, spirulina is quite a decent one as well. I believe like 2 tablespoons of spirulina has got like 10 or 11 grams of protein, which is good, if you put that in a smoothie with like plant protein, hemp seeds, other things, you can easily get up to 40 to 50 grams per serving. So just making sure that you just dial in on those four key foods, and I think you can't go too far wrong.
Good. I think they're all good, right? Really good tips. And I think realistically, if you're training, you're going to need particularly a protein powder, and a good quality one. I think otherwise you're going to really struggle to get to those sort of figures that are suggested. So someone comes to you and wants a bit of advice on nutrition, and they say they're struggling with a bit of their mental health. Now, obviously, the first thing is not going to be necessarily change their diet, but perhaps we've done a bit of digging in this little scenario, and we found that, their diet is poor, and perhaps they're negating certain things, some potential nutrients and certain foods. What sort of nutrients would spring to mind, and what sort of foods would you be thinking maybe to add into that diet?
I think B vitamins are key. There's a lot of evidence in terms of folate, as I mentioned in the study before, folic acid or folate, whichever way you want to look at it. Magnesium, omega-3s, these are really, really key for brain health. Anthocyanins in berries are a good one to get in, omega-3s from walnuts as well. So, and I think it's very key to just get a lot of these quality, unprocessed, really nutritious foods in. One of the things that I did when I was going through everything that I'd gone through, after about a week of obviously my head being all over the place, I was like, right, I need to get back into what I know is best, which is eating well, making sure I'm getting my nutrients in, hitting the gym. So I was going to the gym with my brother pretty much every day or every other day. And I was really fortunate. There was a meal prep company that I was working with at the time. Unfortunately, I told them what happened, and they were actually sending me meals to my house. So I didn't actually have to cook or anything like that. Because I think for me, eating well and training are two things that I know are going to make me feel good, right? Mentally, physically, spiritually. They're going to really dial me in. So in a moment like what I was going through, I knew that I needed to actually dial those in even more to continue feeling really, really good. So as I said, for me, I think one of the things that from a mental health standpoint, I think diet is key. Diet is so key. And of course, we've seen the studies around serotonin and SSRIs and whether or not there's a link there. I just think that for me, when someone presents mental health symptoms to a practitioner or whatever, if diet is not at least a part of the conversation, I think we're really going wrong there, to be perfectly honest. So I think getting those key nutrients in, your B vitamins, magnesium, omega-3s, folate from like the dark leafy greens, anthocyanins from the berries. These are really gonna, and just get as much diversity and as many different, plant fibers into your diet as you can. These are really gonna have to benefit you in the long term.
I think it's interesting you mentioned the serotonin study, which is basically an umbrella study that looked at lots of different studies that have basically probably disproven that low serotonin equals depression. And we need to look a little bit further into, why do people get clinical depression? And my view on it, I think, is that mental health in general, all mental health conditions are very much a spectrum. And we as humans like to put labels and diagnoses on things, and that it's really useful and we have to. But at what point that becomes depression and not is interesting. And that's one sort of caveat. And then also humans are complex. And staying healthy can be complex, but we're also very simple in the sense that if you get the foundations right, and you have multiple different foundations right, these key pillars of diet, stress, relationships, exercise, activity levels, plus I'm probably forgetting a few there, but if you get those right, then we tend to have fairly decent mental health. Obviously it's a little bit more complex than that and multiple factors, but those things in order, usually most of the time over the period of your life, you'll probably have better mental health than not. And so I think we need to, as clinicians, as practitioners, as society in general, kind of strip back and really keep focusing on those things. Perhaps maybe SSRIs and things, if those things aren't right, they're going to really struggle to improve things, right? It's probably a bit of a drop in the ocean if your diet and your relationships are poor. Then just giving someone a drug that increases serotonin, especially now we know that perhaps that's not even the cause. It's not going to do very much, is it? So we need to really go back to basics, I think, with that. It's been a wonderful conversation. I'm coming towards the last question that I ask everyone. I just want to say thank you so much for opening up. I know it's the first time you've done it like this on a podcast, but It was, fairly emotional for me, even listening at the start. I think you're inspirational for the way you've dealt with things and the way you go about your life. And I think I really, really hope loads of people listen to this episode, because I think it will help a lot of people.
Yeah.
Thanks, mate.
No, it's been a pleasure. And thanks for having me on. And definitely, hopefully we can help some people going forward.
Last question. What's your one best bit of advice for anyone looking to improve their health and happiness?
I would say, I've never actually mentioned this, but I think actually maybe consider your mortality. Consider at some point you're gonna go, you're gonna pass away. We all are. None of us make it out here alive. So how do you want to best show up every single day? How can you get better every single day? So, because we don't know when our time's gonna go. I know if I was to go tomorrow, I can look back on my life and be like, you know what? I feel like I've done a pretty decent job and I've left a pretty decent legacy to a degree. Of course, I still have, huge ways to go, and I've got so much more that I want to accomplish and achieve. But consider your mortality. Consider that at some point you may not be here, but you want to try and leave something when you're gone. And for me, that starts with how you kind of set yourself up and how you approach every single day. What can you do to be a little bit better? And it doesn't have to be too much. It can just be, even if you just start taking the stairs over the escalator, that's a win, And this is the thing. I think we always get focused on the huge things that we feel we have to do. Just do the really small thing. Stairs over the escalator, maybe some water over some soda or whatever. You unprocess a few of your meals every day. You go for a few more walks. You start to train a little bit more. You speak to some friends on a more regular basis from a mental health standpoint and community. And I just think that those slow incremental changes will just lead towards a much better, a much happier and a much healthier life. And you'll tend to inspire people around you as well to then go and do the same. So that's what I'd say.
I love that. I say it all the time, like day to day, but like I'm all about the small wins. I'm just like, that's a small win. And I don't think I've said it on the podcast before, but it's so true. If you can have that mentality, then even when shit's hitting the fan, like you can just celebrate a little bit in your day. Exactly. Just those small little wins are massive. Jeffrey, thanks so much.
It's been a pleasure, mate.
And that's a wrap for this episode. I hope you guys found some pearls of wisdom in there. Jeffrey is incredibly knowledgeable about all things nutrition, particularly plant-based foods. And so there was loads of stuff in there, but even more impressive was, I think, the way he's responded to the challenges he's faced over the last year. And I know that I've found a lot of inspiration in that, and I hope you guys have too.